Okay, so here we go.
Here we go.
For so this is the first time that we've done a Facebook Live, and this is called the Behind the Scenes Interviews. And I have with me Teresa, who is our museum director. And the whole point of this interview is basically where I'll ask questions of Teresa, hopefully from the perspective of residents, like what are residents thinking about the museum right now, and what would they like to know? And so that's what I'm going to attempt to do, and kind of doing it off the cuff. And I haven't told Teresa beforehand what questions I'm going to ask, so it makes it a little bit more fun that way, I think. And I think she's giving me some trust that I'm not going to ask questions that are too difficult, but so
I
that's
have
kind
to
of
be ready, right?
so that's what this is about. I know a lot of people won't actually see this actually live, but a lot of people will be able to see it afterwards. So
Yeah.
all right. So Teresa, can you tell residents just a little bit about you? Like, how long? First off, you've been with the museum for a pretty long time. How many years is it?
I have been at the museum 26, almost 27 the year, at the end of the year, it'll be 27 years.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and you know, I'm from Nebraska, but I'm from Kearney, never thought about coming to Hastings. Of course, when I was in high school, I think there's still a little rivalry between Hastings and Kearney, and just never thought I'd land here. But the opportunity came up after I finished my master's degree in museum studies, and I landed the job here. I was really happy and lucky because, your first job out, it's a little harder to get into the field, and so I was kind of apprehensive and was lucky enough to land here. And of course, my expectations were that I actually wasn't going to stay here. I'm 20 years longer than I anticipated, and I don't plan on leaving. So
Yeah, that happens sometimes.
it does. And I fell in love with the community. I fell in love with the museum and the collections and the stories that we can tell. Every community has their origin stories that have some similarities, especially in a region. We were founded because of the railroad and everything, and there's some common stories, but there's also a lot of unique stories and just little things that I think Hastings residents should be proud of our community and the history that we've had in constructing things like the Victory Building or the work at the NAD or even just some of the social aspects and the educational aspects. We have a symphony that most towns our size don't have. We have the Lark. We have 2 colleges. There's so much here. And I hope residents realize that. Because coming from an outside perspective, it was really eye-opening to learn the history of Hastings.
Yeah, I had the same experience coming here, just the naval depot and learning about like why it was located here and just center of the United States, and so that they could send the ammunition to any direction as quickly as possible. It's just, it's a super interesting background.
Yeah, and that's just one of our stories. So yeah.
So when residents come, what are they maybe like most surprised about when they come into the museum? Did you see, is there any sort of thing that's like, oh wow, I didn't expect that? Or
I think right now what we have going on that I hear the most from residents being engaged and excited about is our bus tours and our walking tours. So we have a really good team of educators and just staff in general, but being creative with some of these things and pulling out those little stories that people don't know about, or maybe the older generation does but the younger generation doesn't, and the way that they're engaging people with these tours. I think that if you haven't been on one of the tours, and if you like Hastings history, it's really a good way to dive deeper and learn a little bit more about the houses or the businesses. Or they just finished an Adams County tour, which there's so much to tell that they couldn't squeeze it into one whole trip. So there's going to be.
How long is the trip?
Well, it ended up being 3.5 hours. They had wanted it to be 3, and they actually had to cut some off. So there's going to be follow-up tours. But yeah, there's so much history.
Yeah. How long does it take to do just the Hastings tour?
So most of the biking tours, the walking tours are about 2 hours.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I'm in trouble because I haven't done that yet, and that actually sounds super interesting.
Well,
I
there's a
should, I
bike tour
should do
coming
that.
up, so.
Yeah. So the bike tours are just kind of when weather's better, and then the other.
So the walking tours we've been kind of doing in the spring, and then the bike tours we do in the fall. And depending on the attendance, we may do the same tour a couple of different times. You know, we had, I think there was over 100 on the very first walking tour they did this spring. And so,
Wow,
yeah,
that's pretty good.
it's very
Yeah.
good, very good. Bus tours are a little more limited. You know, we can get how many ever people can come around us for the walking and bike tours, but bus tours are a little more limited, so we are offering those again too. So
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah, yeah.
So we recently just got past Kool-Aid days. That was my first Kool-Aid days here. Yeah, yeah. So you had like a record-breaking number of people at the museum. I remember you saying that.
We
So how
did.
many do you remember how many that was?
I do. So we track our attendance all the time, but for Kool-Aid days we track and trying to see, you know, like our activities drawing people in or whatever. And this what we thought we were coming in on the end of Saturday being maybe the fourth best Saturday. It ended up being the best Saturday. So we had 1,087 people through the museum on Saturday alone.
That's crazy. That really is like a massive amount of people in there.
Right.
That's
We
awesome.
had just a little over 2,000 the entire weekend.
Wow.
Which,
that's cool.
When you think about our regular attendance, our school season is busy, but we never reach that in 3 days. So yeah, that's a lot of people through the building in 3 days.
Okay, another question with Kool-Aid days. So the Kool-Aid man, I frequently, when I'm driving past, I frequently see people like out there taking a picture with the Kool-Aid man.
Yes.
So that must have been like the museum board, or how did that come to, how did we get the Kool-Aid man?
So we kind of had talked many years ago about needing something that would really attract people to the building. And we had tossed around a lot of different ideas. And this actually, I wasn't necessarily involved in making the decision that yes, it was Kool-Aid Man. It was a little before my time as director, but we had this opportunity where we had water leaking into our basement on the front, and we tried every different direction to try and fix that problem. And they finally said, you know, we're gonna have to take the concrete out and dig down to see what's there. Well, in the process, that's gonna tear up your concrete. And so we ended up using that opportunity to reimagine the front, and we decided that Kool-Aid Man needed to be front and center. That's what, you know, draws people in off the interstate. If they're not from around here, they see our billboards that have the Kool-Aid Man on them. You know, we're the birthplace, and there's a lot of people that don't know that, even in our own state.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it
just kind of was
like it was like perfect.
Yeah.
It just seems like everyone loves it being there.
And he's fun. He's colorful. He's a great photo backdrop.
Yeah, that was one thing I noticed. Like, how did they determine to face it towards the street, or you know what I mean? But it seems like the backdrop is better for taking pictures the way it's at now. Is that?
Yes.
Or it's kind of like welcoming people when they're coming into the museum that way.
Where the base was built, we kind of knew, but the actual final positioning, we played with it a little bit when they actually came to install it. And so he is kind of facing the street just slightly, but we wanted to make sure that if you were standing in front of him and getting a picture, that our sign with our logo was on the back, so they knew where they were at.
Yeah.
So yeah, we kind of played with it to make sure we had our cameras out and we were looking.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So I know something you've told me before is with the museum, one of the challenges with a museum is just like keeping things more like active and changing, you know, because I'm sure that's like a comment that you get all the time is like, well, I don't know, should I buy a museum pass if it's going to be similar? But I know that you've talked about that quite a bit and try and change exhibits and stuff, right? Could you talk about that for people?
Yeah. So one of the comments that we do here, and it saddens me, but it's true, is that some of our exhibits have not changed. There are some that we consider historic, which is our dioramas. So when you first walk into the museum and you see the animal hall with all those dioramas, we actually don't want to change those dioramas because those are historic in and of themselves. If people don't realize that those were painted by local artists as part of the WPA project, kind of a big deal, especially considering how much work they did and how much detail they put in these. Um, Really phenomenal work in very short time, really, when they did these dioramas. So that we don't really want to change, but we've enhanced by adding things to the outside of the exhibit. So you can touch and feel an antler or see a paw print or um, maybe feel the hair or whatever.
Yeah. I noticed, one thing I noticed is that you can smell Kool-Aid when you go
Yep,
downstairs, right?
yep,
I thought that was cool.
yeah. But then there's other exhibits like the where the Nature Nook is now. That's changed several times in my time at the museum. Kool-Aid was added in my time, and then we renovated it. And now we're in the process of renovating it again, and it will be really different this time in looks.
Yeah, could you tell them, anyone watching this, if, what is that going to look like this, and how is the funding coming to as the other part for the Kool-Aid, the new Kool-Aid exhibit?
The new Kool-Aid exhibit. So one of the complaints and observations that we've seen with our existing exhibit is that people don't recognize it as Kool-Aid. We wanted to tell the story of Edwin Perkins, and when we did it, we decided to do it chronologically. And so the first thing you see is the storefront, and people don't associate that with Kool-Aid. And so we're taking that realization and that recognition of people who come, especially from outside of the state, they're looking for the iconic Kool-Aid Man. So we're just going to embrace that. And you're still going to have the story of Edwin, but it's not going to be the front and center obvious thing that's going to draw people in. We just actually got the first detailed drawings just last week, and I'm really, really excited because we do have a section for Edwin, but then it's just colors and making the outside wall look like the Kool-Aid Man busting through the brick, you know, those
the
kind of
classic,
yeah, those iconic images and
That's
stuff.
Cool.
We'll probably still have smell. We're still going to keep the beloved premiums because that's one of the things that people love to look at. Oh, I had that when I was a kid, you know.
Yeah.
So there's elements that we're keeping, but the feel is going to be very different.
Yeah.
Much more color, much more vibrant, much more Kool-Aid Man.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
Yeah, and as far as the funding, our foundation has been raising money and collecting money for this project for a while. Part of the half-cent sales tax that we were graciously awarded in, what was it, 2018, I think, part of that's going to this. And then we have the support of the foundation and the family of Perkins. We will also go and reach out to Kraft for those donations as well. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of different things that makes that.
Yeah.
Because it's, and I know the sales tax is a big part of that, and I'm just gonna put a plug in. Like, there are things that we wouldn't, the Hastings wouldn't have if it weren't for that sales tax, and like even in like Parks and Rec is another good example. One of a couple of parks have been, well, one has been redone. It just looks amazing. Crozier, I'm thinking of that right.
Yeah.
And then another one's going to be done here. We'll be working on it pretty soon. But
yeah,
certain things like that just don't get done. But thanks to our residents for voting for those things to happen.
Yeah, I am so grateful, and all of our staff is grateful because there are projects. Moving forward, we are going to finish our storage project. That is not a glamorous project. People don't want to do something that they can't donate to something that they can't see.
Right.
And so with that half-cent sales tax, that was another promise that we made, is that we were going to take care of the collections, and we were going to expand our shelving but reduce our footprint. So we were putting compact shelving in, we're rehousing, we're doing a really detailed inventory that hasn't been done in years, trying to update our records. And what that means for our residents is, if you had somebody who donated something, it's going to be a lot easier for us to look it up because now we have it on a computer. We're not there yet, so if you call and they can't find it right away, you have to be patient. Give us a minute. We're still working on it. But it'll be in the computer. It will have a location. We can go to that shelf and pull it off, and we can show it to you. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal if you're not looking for something that your family donated, but the other aspect of it is that it makes our work much more efficient. Because if we're doing an exhibit and we want something specific, we can go find it. Where in the past we had areas, but it wasn't marked as, row C, shelf B,
Yeah.
that type of stuff.
And how many items are at? Do you know how many items are in the museum? Because I know it's like.
Well, it's expanding, and we're not
Yeah.
taking donations, and it's still expanding. That's the other aspect that we're trying to fix in this project is, in the past they might say, well, there were 57 arrowheads, and that record was only one card though. So it really skews. If you count cards, it's different than what the
Yeah.
card says.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think right now in our digitization project, we're up to roughly, I think around 50,000 objects.
It's a lot to keep track of too.
Yeah, and we're probably only half done.
I can see why that's so critical to have like a good system to keep track of that.
Yeah.
What's I think I may have asked you this before, but what's some of maybe like top three like most interesting items that have come to the museum, or because that's a really hard question when you
It is,
you have so
because
many historically significant items. So, but
when they show up, it's all like, I will say we got a donation of an NAD lunch tray and some silverware just this past week. And I was so excited to see it. It was in Dan's office, and I was like, oh, ah!
So sometimes, how does that come in usually? Like sometimes just random people will bring stuff over to museum, or sometimes you reach out to people, or?
We are trying to work better. Part of what we are doing as we go through this project is we are identifying things that we have way too many of. We're keeping things that have good history, good stories, but we are doing a de-accession project. And de-accessioning basically means we're taking it out of our permanent collection, and most of the stuff we're transferring to other museums. So it's staying in public trust. It's still something that could be seen. For example, we had a ton of sad irons, and we don't need all of them. And so Dan was able to find lots of museums that wanted them because maybe this city that the museum is in is where the iron was made, or it had a history that didn't relate. Another thing that he donated just recently to a museum in California was a little book that was written in Chinese, maybe, I'm not sure on that part, but it was not written in a language that we could read. And we ended up sending it, and they were so excited because it had information about stuff that pertained to their museum. So
that's cool.
Yeah, so we're trying to do that, and what that also is doing is helping us identify where our holes are. So we're going to try and be much better with our community and say, this is what we need. So recently Dan made a plea for memorabilia and items from restaurants, because we don't have much and we're working on an exhibit. And so we're going to be very specific in what we ask for. So when you ask if people bring things in, yes, they do. But unfortunately, if it doesn't fit our mission or we already have a lot of them, we will turn them down, because we need to be responsible with our finances, and we don't need to store that stuff that we already have stuff in that area. And so, yeah, we're being much more selective. But for the most part, we do have to rely on people to donate. We don't have a fund for purchasing. And that's just one of the things that, if we do decide we want to do something, like we are moving forward with our next phases of our exhibit renovation on the second floor, we are actively trying to collect for the NAD, because that's our next exhibit to renovate and build. But we also want to do more of a First People of Nebraska area. And we really don't have any Pawnee artifacts, and Pawnee were the ones that lived here. So, we may have to have our foundation reach out to people to gather money so that we can acquire artifacts, probably modern day artifacts, but still artifacts that are Pawnee. So
it's so I haven't, prior to coming here, I didn't work with a museum. Like, there's so many different aspects of this that are so interesting.
I could talk for hours.
So one of them that I remember I found interesting is like the traveling exhibits, because I'm sure there's some things like you won't let out the door, right? And then
Mhm.
there's some things that you would say, okay, yeah, we can make this a traveling exhibit so another museum can experience this part of our museum.
Right.
And then just a hefty amount of liability and or insurance to make
Yep.
sure. But that's kind of a scary thing too, because some of these things are irreplaceable. So can you
Oh yeah.
talk about that?
So yeah, a lot of times right now when we send things out, it's because somebody has requested specific pieces. We do have one exhibit that we're trying to market right now that is an exhibit that we would send out as a whole, but it doesn't have artifacts in it, so it's a little bit different. But
Mm-hmm.
for example, this was probably 15, maybe 20 years ago. The Smithsonian was doing an exhibit on quilts that tied to pioneer living. And so they made a request for several more quilts, and there was one that we decided that we just didn't feel comfortable sending. One, it was really unique. It's one that's made out of cigar ribbons. It was made by a person who's pretty well known here in Hastings history, Irma Cruz, and so we were a little leery of that, but it was also not very stable. So we were worried about the travel and everything,
So
and
that's
so
another reason why something couldn't go out
yeah,
the door.
so we actually declined to send that one, but we sent the others. They were more stable, and so we do things like that. And yes, there is insurance involved, and um, we would just want to make sure that the artifact is going to be safe when we do things like that.
Yeah. And this is kind of like another reason why the museum is kind of ever changing, and because I know there's that concern. Well, it's
Hmm.
just so similar, but you could have a new exhibit coming in here at any time, really,
Yeah, and we
and new
do.
things are there. Yeah.
Yeah. With our storage project, our East Gallery has been kind of reduced to a smaller footprint, but we use that space to bring in our traveling exhibits. Right now, we have one that was put together by UNL, and it's on the sun and the universe. And so, when we can bring those things in, it brings something different to us. This one doesn't really have artifacts in it, but sometimes they do have artifacts. And then when we bring those things in, we have to be treating it just like our collection too, because that museum has trusted us to take care of it. So yeah, the whole taking care of the collections is very important, whether it's ours or if it's on loan to us or
Right.
you know,
Right.
it's we want to be the best stewards that we can, and be fiscally responsible, but also um, responsible to the collections and the trust that people put in us to give us those objects.
Yeah. Another thing that's come into my mind that I know you've mentioned to me before is that some of I know there's a ton of programs that the museum has which are really cool. There's just tons of stuff, and then I know there's been an effort to get that into Spanish, right? And
Yep.
some of those, and I think that's cool. Trying to meet the diversity of our population.
Yeah, one of our efforts right now is just to be as inclusive of everybody in our community as possible, whether they are coming in with physical disabilities, making sure that our type is large enough for them to read, that they can move around the building with wheelchairs or walkers or whatever they need to assist them.
It seems very ADA friendly.
That's
The
one of
building is, yeah.
Yeah, we know there's a few issues with our restrooms. We don't have an ADA restroom on the main floor, and so we do have others. We're still in compliance, but we would like to add some family restrooms to our main floor down the road. Of course, it all takes money and
Right. Another project at a
yeah,
time.
yeah. And then, like you were saying with the Spanish, all of our new exhibits we are putting into Spanish in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through an app where you can listen to it or in the actual text that's written there. Yeah, just so that if you have a family that comes in and maybe they speak English but not very well, it's just easier for them to learn. And we do see a lot of Spanish-speaking families that come through. So
yeah, no, that's cool. That's good, worthwhile effort for sure.
Yeah.
Um, what so? What about the theater? Could you tell maybe just a quick rundown of how, because it's really interesting that how you bring in shows for the theater, and you're also like careful to not be stepping on anyone else's toes for other theaters that are in town. Could you talk just a little bit about those things?
Yeah, so there's two aspects to the theater. We have what we call our large format films, which are typically around 40 to 45 minutes long, and they're more educational. And that's where the theater was established with that IMAX type film and stuff. We're no longer an IMAX theater, but that's just, it's like Kleenex, it's a brand, but the films, there's still lots of choices. So they're a little bit different than our Hollywood films, and Hollywood films are the ones that you see at the Rivoli or the new theater. The name is escaping me. So, yeah, anyway, those are a little bit different. So with a large format film, we have our distributors and we contact them. We have to pay a fee for what they call the DCP. We are digital, and so it's literally just this hard drive that they send us with the film on it. And then there's like an electronic key that you put in and it allows you to show it. We usually book those for a year, and then so we're paying that DCP fee. Sometimes we have to pay a soundtrack fee, it depends on the company. But then we have to pay the seat royalties. So for every ticket we sell, we have to pay a percentage back.
And see, that's the interesting thing, because I was thinking, initially when I got here, I'm like, couldn't we, make it cost like $1 and then you fill up the whole thing? But it's not that simple. It's not
that simple. No. And then if it's 3D, there's another royalty. So
it's like as low as you can be basically, but being able to get that.
Yeah, because we have to pay for all of the film costs, and then there are bulbs in the projection or in the projector that cost $1,500 a piece to get that big screen projection in clear. It's a very special bulb that's required, and it's very expensive. And then there's just the staff time and things like that too. But you just look at the film costs. For what we end up keeping off of a ticket is not actually very much.
Right.
So, and the Hollywood films are the same way. They don't have a DCP cost. They usually are just based on royalties, but the royalties are much higher. And so, typically for like a 35 millimeter, for a large format, usually your royalties are anywhere from about 27 to 37%. With our Hollywood films, they can be as high as like 67 or 68%. And so, we don't make a lot of money on that.
And those occur like after like our other theaters have already, gone through that showing of that movie or
right. We are called a second run film theater, and so our booker that we go through to get these films kind of has a feel for who's got what. Sometimes the company themselves that's produced the film has said, well, second run theaters can't have it until 8 weeks out or whatever. And sometimes it's just a matter of where is it in our region? Is it Grand Island? Is it here in Hastings? Whose toes are we stepping on? And we try very hard not to do that. But one of the things that COVID did was it really screwed up that industry. And so people who paid attention might have noticed we actually did have a couple films it would have been in 22, so last year, that we overlapped with the Rivoli. They were both films that had been out for quite a while, and one of them was one that the Rivoli had, and then it went away, and then it came back. And so when those happened and we found out about it, I immediately called the manager and I'm like, I am so sorry. And they were like, it's fine. We understand COVID has screwed things up. So
I have a friend who their family owns a theater, and COVID rocked that. It really hurt it a lot, and in the future, it's hard to bring that all back to what it was. And another thing I know you do at the theater is sometimes bring in guest speakers, and maybe not everyone knows that, because I think that's a pretty cool thing. And you have pretty decent attendance at those too, right?
We do.
Give, like, an example or two of that?
So sometimes we bring in films that aren't like typical run films. So for example, we had one that we had been eyeing for a couple of years, and with COVID we had kind of held off on it, but it was called Who Will Write Our History? It was a film that was made about the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II. And after that, we actually were able to contact and have um, via the internet, virtual reality or virtual zooming in, we had a survivor of that ghetto experience come virtually to speak to our residents, and we had a packed theater on that one.
That's really cool.
We also did that with Maverick. When that film was here, we brought in a gentleman who actually went through Top Gun school and was like one of the instructors, who one of our staff members had a contact with a foundation that kind of, just worked their way until we could get that person.
Yeah,
and
really
both
cool.
of those gentlemen were in California. So, and then here, our most recent one is we were able to bring in one of Adams County's residents that grew up here, who is in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean up by Greenland. She's on a research ship, and we brought her in after a showing of Dinos of Antarctica, which is actually one of our large format films, but we brought her in because her research is dealing with the environments and the life in paleo times in the ocean, and so it tied in with what we were doing. And
that's awesome to bring this in. I mean, that enhances the experience.
It does
so much.
It awesome. Does. So yeah, and it's fun to do that. We've been trying to link things like that more that we can. It just is a new experience, and it's a program that hopefully people wouldn't get otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, I just have all these different thoughts that are coming to me as we're talking. Another thing I've heard you mention is the store where you can purchase things. That's kind of, you're looking to change that up a little bit.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I've kind of made it one of my personal goals to enhance our store. We have good things in our store. We have a hard time keeping some things on the shelves. Stuffed animals are one that go out just as fast as we get them in. And of course we have Kool-Aid memorabilia, both from Kool-Aid days, but also stuff that we have had produced for us and stuff. So I want to do more with local people, or Nebraska entrepreneurs, and that kind of ties into Edwin Perkins and his entrepreneurial spirit. Some of the entrepreneurs that we've had here in Hastings, like Western Land Roller, and some of those businesses that had new products that they were making. So it kind of ties into that spirit. But we've brought in some jewelry, we've brought in some food and condiments and things like that that have been made locally. We had some soap that was made from a family who raises goats, and trying to enhance that kind of Nebraska tie, the uniqueness. And so we've been looking for ways to do that and expand the product lines that we have and make it feel more unique. And then down the road, I would like to see a renovation to kind of bring all of our store items together. But that's way down the road. It's not something that's going to happen in the next couple of years. But a renovation of our lobby area so that we can get that store stuff together. We can also put in our family restrooms that we want that would be more ADA accessible and stuff. Make them more accessible from the lobby itself. So just some plans down the road. It's not our top priority right now for those types of things, but doing what we can with the store with our regular budget and bringing in those items that we can sell.
Yeah. So if someone that's watching this has interest in like helping the museum, or just has that tie to it, what would be their avenues for that? They could serve on the museum board is one thing, right?
Yep.
What are maybe some other things that they could do?
They can serve on the museum board, which is a 4-year term. We turn 2 people off every year, so unless they re-up. And then I know it's not written in the city code, but we actually do term people or have term limits so that they can only be on the board for 2 terms, just to keep new, fresh people coming.
Yeah, sure.
You can also volunteer. A lot of the programs that we do, we need extra help. So for Kool-Aid days, we need extra help. We had a lot of volunteers that came with that.
So many volunteers for that. I was surprised to see how many there were.
Yeah. Um, we do overnights with our Cub Scouts and Girl Scouts once a year. So we have one of those coming up in November. And we always need a little extra help, not to spend the night. I always tell people, don't worry, you don't have to spend the night. Because if you're old like me, that's really hard. But to do some of the activities in the evening, running what we call stations. So it's a learning activity. We'll train you on it. You have all the supplies you need and everything. But we always are looking for help with those types of things. So volunteering. You can always come and volunteer and help with our gardens. We are always grateful for people who come and do our weeding and stuff. We do right now have master gardeners that I will give a big shout out who actually do all of the work on the north side of the building. We don't actually do any of that. So.
Oh yeah, good
Yeah,
shout out.
It's a huge shout out. They do so much for us,
Well,
and there's a big group of them. So
museum, like the landscape and stuff, it always looks really nice. So yeah, props to them.
Yeah. And if you have artifacts or even stories, we collect stories as much as we do artifacts. If you have a memory from working at one of the businesses around town, or something that maybe majorly happened, like when Bobby Kennedy came to town, or things like that,
Yeah.
You can share those things and help us expand that history. And then there's always financial donations. We actually have a foundation set up for that type of stuff. It's for our bigger projects like our exhibits and stuff. We have targeted projects right now. So like Kool-Aid and the NAD are targeted projects, but there's also education programs. There's a fund for that. Or you can just give to the endowment, or just in general for whatever needs come up. So you can give to the foundation as well.
So there's a ton of different ways to either be involved or give.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's good to know, to share with the public.
And we appreciate every little thing that people do, because we are a relatively small staff for all the things that we do.
Mm-hmm.
And so having that extra help or the extra finances or even just the stories is so important.
Yeah. So if someone wants to volunteer or do any of the things that we just talked about, what would be their best route? Should they just come over to the museum sometime and say, or should they be reaching out to you directly? What's the best way to?
For volunteers, if you're interested in volunteering, go to our website. We actually have a page that has the application on it. If you're interested in being a board member, you can reach out to me, or there's a site on the city's website for that as well. If you're donating things, just give us a call, and the people at the front desk will route you to the right person that you need to talk to. So, yeah. And check our website for all of the things that we do. We have all of our events listed there, all of the upcoming films and the times. If we have changes, we do what is called a holler box. So, for example, if we have a facility rental, which maybe people don't know about either, but if we have a facility rental that's renting out the theater, and so we aren't going to have any public shows, we'll put up like a holler box when you first look at our webpage to let people know that, hey, the theater's closed from whatever time today to whatever time. So I always encourage people to look at our webpage to just see what's going on and find out the latest details. So, yeah. And facility rentals, we do rent things for different parts of the museum. So you can have a private showing of a film. You can even play video games in the theater. You can have a birthday party in the Abbott Room. We've had wedding receptions. No dancing, because we really don't have the acoustics for that or the space, but we can do a lot of different rentals. We've had business meetings and stuff there, so
that's cool. Yeah, that's good to put a plug in for that, because I don't know how many people realize all those different things.
Right.
So I think this was cruised by. We're at 40 minutes in, so I know.
Sorry, folks, I'm a talker.
I know we could just we could keep going for a pretty long time, but we'll probably try and wrap it up a little bit now. So I guess kind of like last sort of question, is there anything that you want like residents to know about the museum? Just, anything that would be important that you would want to convey to them?
I think really we understand that we need to serve the community and we need to do things that encourage the community to become engaged with us. And every little thing, whether you're doing a walking tour or shopping at the store, we so appreciate it. And we love being part of the community. We often hear from people that come from out of state how great this museum is for the size of the community. Most people expect, and we've had people tell us this, they expect a little historical society type situation and are absolutely amazed. And we do draw people from all over. Kool-Aid Days alone, we had, I bet I talked to over a dozen families from different, out of area, like Illinois, Kansas, North Dakota, Minnesota. I think there was somebody from Wisconsin. There was somebody from California, Washington State.
So, yeah, it brings people over. That's cool.
So Kool-Aid brings them in, but we get those visitors year round. Yeah, I hope that people appreciate the gem that this museum is, and we are working very hard to keep it a gem of the community. So we value input, we value participation and support.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'm going to put a plug in for you and your staff too, because I mean, you can tell right now as we're talking, like you're so passionate about the museum.
Oh, I am.
It's just, yeah. I mean, it's very easy to tell that everyone really cares about it and wants it to be the best that it can be. It's just so easy to see that.
Yeah.
And so we're fortunate to have you and employees that like care so much about it, because that directly translates into a good experience for residents. So thank you for what you do.
And I am very proud of our staff. We have very creative and hardworking members. We have people who do the hard work of greeting people, which sometimes isn't always easy. And yeah, we have a great staff, and I'm so appreciative for that.
Yeah.
Makes my job easier.
Yeah. Yeah. So cool. Well, I think we will probably just we'll finish up now, and thank you for doing this and being the guinea pig, so to speak, as the first person.
No worries. Anytime, I can keep talking.
So, well, I'm sure we'll learn a couple of things from this. I do notice someone said the audio is a little hard to hear, so that's good feedback. We'll try and figure that out next time a little bit better. So, for those that are watching, thank you for chiming in, and we'll be doing this once a month. So I will ask for volunteers for the next one, or voluntold them or something like that. And so yeah, we'll do this once a month, and hopefully you enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.